Okay, I'm Kurt Arsenault, restoration volunteer on the Mustang Restoration Project. The project began October 1st of 2003, and between Norm and I and a couple of other volunteers, we've invested between 5,000 and 6,000 volunteer hours on the project.
The project has been going on, as he said, since 2003. We're very proud of the project in that it's been totally funded by donations and by out-of-pocket, so it hasn't cost the museum one penny. And between the two of us, I think we're pretty proud of what we've accomplished.
Okay, the beginning of the engine project began with painting of the valve covers. Once the valve covers were painted, it was clear that that wasn't going to match up with the rest of the engine because it looked pretty bad. So we pulled the engine out, started to take it apart, and realized we needed a stand. We were able to borrow a stand from a Mustang owner in Danville, Butch Schroeder, who owns Little Margaret. The last bit of paraphernalia a Mustang owner wants to use is his engine stand. So he loaned it to us, had the engine out on a stand for about 3 years while we disassembled it, got it torn down far enough to find out why it was stuck and wouldn't rotate, freed up the engine. Then in reassembly, we painted all the components as they went back together. All the aluminum tubing has been bead blasted and painted. New hoses and clamps to reassemble it, and replaced some missing parts that had been robbed or removed over the years to make it look like it would function. The wiring harness was in a deteriorated state. We built a new engine harness, completely new engine harness using the existing fittings, and then reassembled the engine, set it back in with the help of a crane on a heavy equipment service truck, and back together it went with the new fittings, paint, and replacement parts that were missing. Also got a set of spark plugs donated from Vintage V12 in California, so we were able to hook up the plug wires and make it look like a functioning engine.
As part of the project, we decided that we wanted to repopulate and rebuild the cockpit section of the Mustang to represent the way it would have looked in normal operations when it was actually active and being used. And unfortunately, with the P-51H, there are no common parts with other P-51 Mustangs, so virtually everything in here had to be fabricated in order to reproduce the look and feel of the cockpit correctly. So once you get inside the cockpit, many of the gauges are replacements. There are some authentic parts that we were able to acquire through different sources, but by and large, everything else had to be either fabricated in our shop, or in some cases, like graphics and things, had to be created on the computer and then reproduced so that we could have an authentic look. All of the parts that are in here were based on the original engineering drawings, so they're all authentic as far as size, shape, and dimension. The paint inside is identical to the way it would have looked when it came out of the factory. Altogether, it does look a bit cleaner and nicer than what it would have looked in service, but the advantages of having the cleaner paint and systems in here is just so that it can be kept clean easier and doesn't require as much maintenance. Even though with the cockpit closed up and the plane on display, very few people will ever see this, we thought it was important to make it historically accurate so that researchers coming to this museum to look at this 10 years, 20 years, 30, 40 years from now would still be able to see what the plane would have looked like when it was in service.
The gear wells were completely stripped, painted. Norm did the paint and made the new wiring harnesses. The mechanical linkage and the hydraulic tubing I painted, and we recreated some of the missing tubing. The cables that were in the aircraft were rusted and rotted, so we manufactured new cables and assembled them so that everything in the gear well is as complete as we could make it. The uplink rods, some of them were badly corroded, so we were able to de-rivet some of the fittings and assemble them onto new rods so it looks a little fresher. The gear retraction linkage was froze, and we disassembled it, painted it up, and put it back together. This is the left side gear well. A little bit of different stuff going on in here. It's got the radio antenna mast, wood radio antenna mast, the landing light, the retractable landing light, And again, new cables for the emergency gear drop. This one is the gun camera door cable. So when the gear leg folds up, comes into the opening, pushes on that cable and opens the gun camera door. So anytime the gear is down, the door is shut to protect the gun camera lens. When the gear is folded up and the airplane's in the air, the gun camera door is open so that anytime the gun is fired, or the guns are fired, the camera operates so that a pilot can prove any claims for kills.
So for the paint scheme that we chose for the Mustang, we wanted to make something that was easily recognizable and memorable. Looking into history, we were trying to find a scheme that would be absolutely historically correct, which is required by the Air Force. And in doing that, we found this paint scheme that we're using now called the Louisiana Heatwave. The Louisiana Heatwave was actually a P-51D that was flown in World War II by an ace pilot, Claude Crenshaw. After the war, he joined the Air Force Reserves and flew out of Grenier Air Force Base in New Hampshire. And as an intelligence and recruiting officer, his plane was painted up in markings similar to what he had in World War II so that he could fly the plane around and show this to people that he was working on recruiting into the Air Force. So the basic paint job that you see here replicates his World War II vintage aircraft as well as the P-51H that he flew. So all the markings on the plane have come from photographs of that aircraft, and in putting this together, we've gone through research to find out and make sure that we've got the right colors, the right markings, and then in addition, going back to North American aviation information and documentation to find out where and what are all the little decals and stencil markings that go on the aircraft. We've gone all the way back with this one, so the markings and stuff that we put on the plane are exactly the way they would have looked when this plane rolled off the assembly line. The airframe itself would have originally been just natural metal finish. Unfortunately, on a 70-year-old airplane, that's not always possible to do, so we've painted it in silver, as you can see, and we've applied the markings on here in vinyl overlays because that's the most accurate way of reproducing the artwork at the minimum amount of cost. Now at this point in the project, we're actually very close to completion. We probably have another 40 or 50 man-hours left to put in on the aircraft. Essentially, we're just finishing up some last detail work in order to close this up, and we should have the plane done probably by mid-year this year.